I would do. Season 7, when I was climbing, I would literally sit down, watch anime, watch YouTube, sit in queue 30 minutes. No problem, every game was fucking good, right? Every game was not bad, I would just watch anime. This is trying to be like the happy medium, but it's still dog! Still dog! I'm jungle! Look! Look at this! This is my ADC. He doesn't play jungle. Guys, what is this?
Season 11, 2021, League of Legends. Regardless of your opinion on Riot's massive risks and probably minimal rewards that they've had this year, and even if you haven't enjoyed your time all that much, one thing is absolutely clear. This has been a very interesting season to talk about, good or bad, and I'd like to continue that trend today, not talking about all of the new items and everything that has happened there, but actually about the many different mini reworks that we've seen. More specifically, I'd like to talk about these two. But why? Why are these two mini reworks significant? Well, Riot has decided to now try again with an interesting stacking mechanic for champions. It's similar to a champion evolution such as Kha'Zix and all of his upgrades mixed in with Veigar or Senna infinite scaling. It's something that used to exist way back in the day in Cassiopeia and Rengar's kit, and now with Viktor and Sona, it looks like they want to try again and bring it back. Let me explain. A few years ago, I started doing these champion history videos, breaking down their development, release, and all of the things that would happen during their lifetime in this game. The research for these videos has been the most interesting part for me, and it's now given me a decent understanding of champion mechanics, how Riot makes decisions when they make new ones, and what that whole process ends up looking like. Furthermore, some of the newer champions have had a solid amount of information for us to learn and talk about. Riot started doing things like development podcasts, consistent posts and teasers and trailers to give us an understanding into the back end of their design. And now that League has more than 150 of them, it means that some mechanics and some ideas have been recycled and repeated. If you really pick apart the new member Akshan, you can see a lot of similarities between other kits. A few examples are like how he has a 3-hit passive, just like several other champions do. His Q is quite similar to a Sivir Q, his W is a mixture of a Teemo passive, Taliyah passive, and Twitch Q, and his ultimate is a Lucian, Syndra, and Caitlyn ultimate mixed together in a sort of salad, if you will. But I don't think the problem with Akshan is that he's not unique. Your first inclination might be to say that he has no new ideas, it's all way too borrowed. But I would say that League of Legends has many problems, but one of them is not that these new champions aren't original. Just because they have some borrowed ideas already found in other kits does not mean to me that Akshan or Yuumi or Samira aren't their own unique champ. The question is now, why did they give up this unique stacking mechanic for so long? Why did it only exist in Cassiopeia's kit for a small amount of time, and what made this a rare mechanic that we didn't see recycled over and over again, now that we've seen it revitalized with the new Viktor and Sona reworks? What were the similarities? And hey, wait a minute, what about Kindred and Gangplank? Today's video is brought to you by Buff. Buff is an awesome way to earn free stuff while playing your favorite games. There are challenges to complete on games like League, Valorant, Fortnite, Dota 2, and much more. You can stack up these Buff coins just by playing. It's safe and won't affect anything in your gameplay. No FPS drops, no lag spikes, or PC slowdown. The best part is that the Buff coins can then be reused to redeem Steam cards, Riot points, game keys, hardware, and a whole suite of gamer-friendly rewards. It's easy, safe, and simple to use, and just recently I used it to unlock this cool Ezreal skin, so you can earn your favorite skins in the game by using Buff. It's an authorized app on Overwolf, which I'm sure that you've heard of. Go check out Buff using my link in the description down below, because you could be missing out on free skins. To understand more about today's topic, let's first break down all of the different types of stacking and evolution that we see in this game. So first things first, there are just temporary stacks, which give champions immediate bonuses. A good example would be like Jax or Lilia stacks. Both of these have a hard cap and can't just continuously ramp up. But when you think about stacking in this game, these kinds of passives probably aren't the first thing that comes to mind. You might think of Veigar, Nasus, Sion, Kindred, Swain, Senna, Bard, or Thresh's infinite infinite scaling. When we say infinite, even though it's theoretically possible to get an infinite amount of stacks on Nasus, and I've had more than 2000 AP on Veigar one time, and Kindred might actually be able to get more than 2 marks in a game, according to the wiki, even though I've never seen it personally, because my Kindreds usually go to the enemy Krugs, die, and AFK, these also usually still have some kind of hard bound due to the limitations of the game itself. Rarely could you get more than 2000 AP on Veigar because you get to a point of being so strong that if you haven't ended the game yet, you're just kind of trolling. If Nasus has more than 1000 stacks, he can start killing turrets in a matter of seconds. These high numbers can only be achieved in fun custom games typically, because you can kind of just see what it would be like, but it's not realistic. There's also Senna and Thresh Souls where both of them gain stats and become stronger, but it's just basic infinite scaling. Senna's is a little more complex though, because you can gain souls by attacking champions, so if you auto Q or Q auto, something to that degree, you will also gain stacks, not just by minion kills and monster kills, stuff like that. Swain also has an interesting infinite scaling too, because the way he obtains them is either by pulling enemies with his passive or hitting his W, but these bonuses are kinda lame and don't really feel that impactful. Bard probably has the most intricate design for these types of infinite scalers because his passive meeps do gain new abilities. They begin to have a cone effect and have some AoE, they gain a strong slow, some more damage, and he gets a lot more of them as well. You probably don't even think about Bard when it comes to strong scaling, but technically, yeah, he does. Next up would be the evolutions, which aren't really stacks per se, but throughout the game your kit will get directly stronger and you'll gain new abilities. In the case of Kha'Zix and Kayle, it has to do with them getting ranks in their ultimate, so at levels 6, 11, and 16, each of them are able to upgrade themselves. For Kayn, it all has to do with his passive and getting damage and fighting in, that way he can gain enough orbs to become an actual champion. Kai'Sa evolves on getting gold, where her item stats allow her to upgrade each of her basic abilities. This requires her to reach a certain threshold of 100 AD, 100 AP, and or 100% attack speed. This theoretically means that she could evolve very quickly if the enemy team ints. Syndra becomes stronger every time she maxes out an ability thanks to her passive, so it should happen at levels 9, 13, 16, and 18. For current Rengar, the way his Bonetooth Necklace works now is that he gains AD by stacking on each of the enemy champions. He needs to score a takedown on all of them, very similar to how the Domination Hunter runes work. This is limited to the 5 enemies, meaning that once he gets all 5 kills, it doesn't let him start stacking again, and it's not infinite. Similar to Kai'Sa, there's also the potential for Rengar to pop off like crazy, or get a lucky teamfight at the Dragon or Baron and get all of his stacks very quickly. And of course, there are also item and Dark Harvest stacks, things like Tyr, Magi, Seekers, formerly Sword of the Occult, RIP. Most of the time, these are permanent stacks that have to reach some kind of threshold or cap, but in the case of Magi's, it's actually a risk versus reward scenario up to its max of 25. For Dark Harvest, it's technically infinite scaling, but I don't know if I've ever seen more than like 30 or 35. Now that we've covered most of the ways the champions can become stronger over the course of the game through a stacking type system, we've obviously still left out a lot. We can do a deeper dive into League history and talk about the Old Cassiopeia, the Old Rengar, Viktor, Kindred, and Gangplank. The original Cassiopeia launched all the way back in 2010, and while she still fulfills the same role in a team being a DPS mage, her kit had a bunch of little differences across the board. The first reason is that, well, she could actually buy boots back then. But aside from that, there were some other key differences as well. Her passive was completely different. It was a temporary stack bonus very similar to Lilia or Jax called Deadly Cadence. This would make her abilities cost less mana for each ability previously cast in the last 5 seconds. This could go all the way up to 50%. So if you would throw out 5 E's in a row or something like that, it would be on the 6th one, the E would only cost 50% of the normal amount. Her miasma also did not have a grounded effect back then. She wouldn't even see that for many years later. It wasn't even an effect in League of Legends because Singed also didn't have grounded. It was just a slow. She also had no healing in her kit whatsoever on her launch, and her E had a base cooldown of 5 seconds at all ranks. In order to get the real DPS, just like always, she had to land the poison first, making the cooldown go from 5 seconds to a half a second. The Cassiopeia Champion Spotlight is an absolute gem. I mean, this is like the worst video Riot has ever made. The quality on this Spotlight is just an absolute masterpiece. The frame rate is trash, the pacing and information is so unorganized and random. I don't even know how this got released.
Cassiopeia's ultimate is Petrifying Gaze. She damages enemies in a cone in front of her. If they're facing her, they're turned into stone and stunned, otherwise they're slowed. I tried to play Cassiopeia as a jungler. You can see here that even at level 1, she has the power to die horribly against most jungle monsters. However, if you can't guess where your opponent is properly, you might just get taken out before you can react. Twitch took his time getting around the likely spam spots, so that he could hit me without taking damage beforehand. When fighting against Cassiopeia, note that she is extremely reliant on her full combo, as well as her ultimate in scary situations. If you can dodge Noxious Blast, or get out of range for Petrifying Gaze, you have a great chance of winning the fight.
That's the truth.
This original version of Cass was not very good. Sure, she had some strengths, the damage over time was potent, and she had real DPS as well as some good burst potential, but during the early seasons, she was never truly a top tier pick. There were a couple of key factors that eventually led to her getting multiple reworks and why she wasn't that good. First off, the champion was a lot harder to play. Now, keep in mind, this problem was not fixed in her 2014 mini rework, but it was still a contributing factor as to what made her less popular. This champ is famous for her E ability, which allows her to have best-in-class DPS for a mage. She plays and feels a lot more like an AD carry than a traditional burst or long-range mage. The biggest skill discrepancy between new and veteran Cass players is the ability to use her E correctly, to kite and position well. The good news is that if you're trying to pick her up, thankfully all is not lost. If you've never played her before, you might not know that her E does not cancel your movement command. So unlike right-clicking and orb walking as an AD carry, Cassiopeia only has to right-click on the ground once and then spam E on a target. Using E will not interrupt your path or stop you. But it wasn't always this way.
This list it's not an indirect buff in any way, shape, or form. In fact, it's a very direct buff to Cassiopeia. And although it kind of goes against the spirit of this video, I wanted to include it anyways because it's something that is likely to go fairly unnoticed, because it was included in the rather minor and unappreciated bug fix section of the patch notes. But for being included in such an insignificant way, I actually think it's the biggest direct buff of the entire patch. Similar to Rise, Cassiopeia now retains her previous movement or attack command after E Twin Fangs cast finishes. What this means is that you can click in one direction and cast Twin Fangs in any other direction, and you will automatically continue moving in that direction that you initially clicked on.
Ever since patch 6.2, she has been quite a bit easier to play. The amount of mechanical skill in the champion is still extremely high, but it used to be even higher. Back in the day, every single time you wanted to cast E, which is, you know, hundreds if not thousands of times per game, you had to mouse over the target and then click off to move again. The E took precedence and then removed your movement command. This sounds exactly like how AD carries have to right-click and kite, and guess what? You're right. It is kind of the same thing, except that AD carry has always had the ability to use A-click or attack move. Playing Cassiopeia at a high level before 2016 when they gave her this bug fix, which was actually just a straight buff, was like trying to play AD carry all the time without A-click ever existing. Another reason is that the meta would favor a lot of her counter picks. Back in the early seasons, assassins were much better and top tier more often than not. LeBlanc, Kassadin, Talon, Zed, Katarina, Akali, these were staple mid lane champions, and 3 of them had silences, by the way. Since Cassiopeia did not have grounded and didn't have any healing in her kit, it meant that assassins just pummeled her because they could easily get into range. Nowadays, because she has grounded as well as healing, it makes her one of the better mages into assassins, but that was simply not the case all those years ago. The final main reason why she wasn't that good is that the old Ryze was more effective in almost every way. He had all point and click, including a point and click route. He didn't really have to kite and couldn't miss any skill shots because he didn't have any. And for every reason that you could possibly want to pick her, Ryze would just be better and probably make more sense in every situation. If you needed an AP solo laner who scales and provides solid DPS as well as a little bit of tankiness, Ryze fit that description a lot better back then. All of this led up to her getting reworked on patch 4.16. Riot's notes on this update would give us some useful insight on where their heads were at. They say that in this update, the key to Cassiopeia's heavy hitting damage potential lies within her new passive, Aspect of the Serpent. Cassie builds power throughout the game as she poisons enemy champions, unlocking stat bonuses to fuel her now more powerful Twin Fang. This new aspect of growing her endgame scaling allows us to solidly push her into the completely absurd damage potential space that she's currently hanging around. This comes at the cost of some early game power, but make no mistake, you can expect to see a late game Cassiopeia as one of the most potent damage threats in the league. So what was this new passive? What did it do? It was called Aspect of the Serpent, and Cassiopeia would permanently gain a stack of Aspect of the Serpent for each second that she has an enemy poisoned, for each poison unit that she also killed, and every time she hits an enemy champion with Twin Fang, capping at 400 stacks. What did these stacks do? Well, at 75 stacks, you would gain 5% more ability power, and Twin Fang would begin to restore some health. At 200 stacks, you would gain more ability power by 10%, and she would gain 25% cooldown reduction. Finally, at 400 stacks, she would gain 30% more bonus AP. This new version was instantly stronger, and during Season 4 and Season 5, her competitive presence would go up. She was a solid solo laner for most levels of play. Now that she finally had some built-in sustain, it allowed her to do much better into those pesky assassins. That extra sliver of health could be the difference between dying to one or surviving. Season 5 specifically had a lot of cast games for pro play. You might even remember Faker and EasyHoon playing her. Guys like Power of Evil played a lot of Cassiopeia. Hooney would even take her in the top lane. Bjergsen would dominate on the champ. All of those guys popped off. Each one of these passive thresholds were so much better for her, and it finally completed at your 400 stacks, where you got an absolute truckload of AP. Cass, along with Veigar, was one of the few champions that could consistently reach over 1000 AP. On patch 4.21, this stacking system was reworked a little bit. At first it might look like a nerf due to the stacking benchmarks being increased, as well as removing the stack on unit kills and Twin Fangs, but Riot's goal was to actually make the bonuses unlock more quickly, which is exactly what happened. While walking back to lane or recalling, downtime that normally didn't help you stack, the passive generation was a big boost, plus you could still generate it by poisoning enemies. After a year of dominating the game, Season 6 would roll around and her huge buff to her movement commands came up, and she saw a lot more play even for casual players. But that's not the only thing that happened during that year. On 6.9, the Mage class update went live, and Cassiopeia was reworked again. This was the day that her unique stacking mechanic died and was now gone forever. Her passive was replaced by what it is now, which is her inability to buy boots, and allowing her to get 6 real mage items. This was also the day that she received her grounded mechanic, and this is when her E was given the healing effect on poisoned enemies, which of course was previously on one of her passive breakpoints. This means that her stacking mechanic only ended up being in her kit for less than 2 years. As with all of the champions we will cover today, we'll dive more into why that might have been at the end, but for now let's move on to Rengar's Bonetooth Necklace. If you're a veteran player, you might even associate Rengar with this item still, because this is such an iconic thing that is so interesting to think about how it doesn't exist anymore. Rengar had a stacking system, except it was far weirder and more unique. It really has quite the story. So get this, all the way back to the very beginning of Rengar, his first iteration was actually an item that you had to purchase. Yes, unlike Viktor's old hex core that you started the game with and was free for the first version, Rengar's Bonetooth Necklace was a basic item that would cost 800 gold. It is the very thing that allowed you to begin stacking it. This meant that if you chose not to buy the Bonetooth Necklace, you simply could not stack. It was just an item in the shop that was only available to Rengar. The math on the gold efficiency for this item was very favorable, as the AD gained would scale with Rengar's level. At level 18, there was no other item in the game more effective for raw attack damage. And here's something that's funny, you could buy a few of them if you wanted to. The passive for the stacks was unique, but the AD per level was not. So in some situations, if you're just trying to end the game quickly and you had one slot left, it may have been a decent idea to purchase a second necklace just for the AD. Once you had this item in your inventory, for every kill or assist that you would gain, it would grant him 1 stack. Just like Magi's though, it was a risk versus reward, because you would also lose a stack if you died. The maximum amount of stacks was 20, and at 14 is when you gained access to the highest threshold benefit. What's nice about the 20 stack system is that if you were able to max it out, you'd have a little bit of wiggle room to die a couple of times before losing the max benefit. But of course, 20 kills and assists is a lot considering that you can't die. The Bonetooth Necklace was one of the most unique champion kit ideas ever. If you've just started playing League in the last couple of years, it almost seems hard to imagine that this kind of thing existed, and it did for a while actually. This version of the Bonetooth Necklace was in the game for roughly 2 years, until patch 4.5, where Rengar saw his first major rework. Many different things about his kit were reworked that day, but the key thing that we are interested in is the Bonetooth Necklace changes. It was no longer 800 gold, it did not take up another item slot, and it was not risk versus reward anymore like Magi's. Instead, it was changed to a trinket item that you could get at level 1 and essentially acted like an additional passive. There were 4 new trophy bonuses. At 3 trophies, he would gain flat bonus movement speed while either out of combat or in bushes. At 6 trophies, Unseen Predator would gain bonus range, and then at 12 and 20 trophies respectively, he would gain increased stealth duration on his ultimate and increased bonus movement speed. This rework came with newfound power for this kitty as he rocketed up the ban rate and play rate charts. He would become a top tier jungler for the rest of Season 4 as his snowballing and consistent scaling were now more prevalent. Everyone was spamming him, trying to mimic all of these pro players who were really good at carrying games. There is a good reason that Samsung Rengar is a skin, because Dandy loved playing Rengar during that season and during the World Championship. But hang on, just saying that Dandy got a Rengar skin isn't enough. That doesn't encapsulate his true power during Season 4. Check out these stats. During that World Championship, these were the highest win rate champions. Now, if we exclude champions who were only picked a single time, like how Lissandra had a 100% win rate, but that's just because she was 1-0, this is the list. In 4th place, Twitch was picked 24 times with a total presence of 45% across both picks and bans, racking up a crazy good win rate of 17 wins and 17 losses. That's 71%. By the way, Twitch was another champion that got a world skin that year with Samsung Twitch. In 3rd, Vayne was picked only 4 times, but did have a win rate of 3-1. In 2nd place, Alistar was the most overpowered champion in the game at the time, being the only champion to have a total presence of 100%. There were 78 games during that World Championship, and he was banned in 73 of them. Picked only 5 times, the 5 times that he was open, and in those games he went 4-1 with an 80% win rate. And finally, in 1st place with a 42% presence, picked in 14 games and banned 19 times, Rengar was 12-2 during the Season 4 World Championship, a win rate of over 85%. He was gross. Despite his extreme levels of power, Riot did not jump the gun and nerf him directly because they knew his Season 4 jungle prowess was still somewhat temporary, as Season 5 had a huge jungle rework coming. He was still a strong jungler, albeit a weaker version of his 2014 self, and that's because the new items in the jungle benefited all of the other types of junglers much more. Things like Devourer on patch 4.20 for Warwick, the Cinderhulk meta for Sejuani and Gragas, and Runeglaive at the end of the year, which were very good for Nidalee and Elise. The jungle enchantment that Rengar went back then, which was called Warrior, was never a top tier option for professional play. Once we reached the end of Season 6 and on into Pre-Season 7, Rengar was one of the many major reworks in the Assassin class update, and that is the day that his Bonetooth Necklace died the way that people probably remember if you're a veteran or old school player. His passive was swapped out for the one that we have today, which does require a little bit of planning because you want to make sure that you get a kill or assist on each of the 5 champions on the enemy team, but that's it. And all it does is give you attack damage, doesn't give you any other specific bonuses. Alright, it's Viktor time, baby. Man, I could go on for hours talking about how terrible the original Viktor was as a champion. I mean, look, he wasn't useless, but acting like OG Viktor was good is also just a straight up lie. Viktor came out at the end of 2011 in the preseason for Season 2. The Hex Core was there from the very beginning and was always a free item that started in your inventory. It always gave stats and augmented abilities for a gold fee, which is totally fine. However, the main key difference is that the Hex Core could only be augmented and upgraded one time. This meant that Viktor had to choose between augmenting one of his 3 abilities. I tried to find any posts or videos detailing what the best option was, and more often than not for this original Viktor, players just maxed Q and augmented Q, because his original Q ability was his most consistent form of damage. It was just one spell, by the way, as well. You know how Viktor these days, when you throw out your Q, it's kind of the first part is a spell, and then the second part gives you an empowered auto attack? Well, the old one just threw out one damaging spell and gave you the shield. His original death ray did not have the aftershock upgrade where it does the spell damage a second time. Instead, it just became a lackluster damage over time effect. The reason this champion needed to be reworked started to become more apparent by the day back then. He was truly a weak and underwhelming champion with tons of potential, which is why on patch 4.17 he saw an awesome gameplay update. These kinds of game updates are the best. Viktor's visuals, animations, and some voice lines and splash art were all updated, and each one of his abilities got better. But the cool thing is that his kit was nearly identical in all of the ways that matter. The abilities pretty much did the same thing, just in a better way. For our purposes, the most important change is that he could finally upgrade his Hex Core a few times, thus letting him augment all of his abilities. Each Hex Core upgrade would cost 1,000 gold, giving him useful stats in the process as well. This version of Viktor is the one that you're probably most familiar with, and over the last several years, he went from being top tier and broken in high elo and pro play to absolutely worthless and a bottom of the barrel champion, over and over and over again, constantly teeter-tottering. The times he dominated is when the meta favored scaling mid lane mages such as Orianna and Azir, and his Hex Core upgrades would only cost 1,000, but then he would be super weak when they would nerf him, increasing the gold cost for the upgrades, and you had to lane against assassins. They really struggled to balance Viktor over the last few years, which is why he had to see another rework recently. This preseason brought us a new Viktor with an entirely new passive system. Now he gains hex fragments for killing minions and monsters, as well as a chunk of them for takedowns. Each augment will be earned after 100 fragments, so that makes the new Viktor snowball really hard if you can get the ball rolling on a couple of early kills. Just some random teamfight or skirmish can make or break this champion. If you're able to pick up just an assist or two, you'll be sitting pretty. What they also did is cleared up finally that item slot for him, as the Hex Core no longer would cost any gold, and it meant that you could have 6 items. Now granted, he did lose the fact that Hex Core gave stats, and it wasn't just a complete waste of an inventory slot, but I think a good amount of Viktor players would agree that this system rework was positive for the champion, at least compared to where he was the last few years. Kindred is not a typical champion, and in fact, they were never designed to be. This champion was made to fill an unused slot in League of Legends, a gap, if you will, of untapped potential. Aside from the occasional off-roll Twisted Fate or Teemo or Twitch jungle, League of Legends never had a proper ranged jungler. Also, back then Graves was not a jungler at all. ADCs in 2015 could really only go bot lane. The release of Kindred was a necessity for the game to try out a ranged AD carry jungler. The way that the marks work has been mostly the same since release, with a couple of minor tweaks here and there that help out the RNG and which camps will be marked. The types of jungle camps that Wolf will mark currently works as follows. On 0 marks, it's just the Scuttler. On 1 through 3, it'll be Scuttle, Raptors, and Gromp. On 4 through 7, it'll be Krugs, Blue Buff, Red Buff, or the Wolves, and then at 8+, it will only do Rift Herald, Baron, Dragon, or Elder Dragon. As the player for Kindred, of course, you can as Lamb mark champions through the in-game interface that they have, which is the only other way to generate stacks. Kindred's basic abilities will be empowered through these stacks, as well as gaining bonus range at different thresholds. This is by far the most interactive and player-focused scaling system that we've ever seen in League of Legends, but it comes at a huge price. There's a lot of team coordination involved with this, and many of the reasons that Kindred mains can be frustrated sometimes is because as a team, you kind of need to help the Kindred get her stacks. On top of that, it is such a learning curve and skill discrepancy between good Kindreds who know how to get marks and bad ones that sit on 2 to 3 for the entire game. For many years, Sona has been in a weird spot. She didn't really have a place compared to other enchanters because she had a weak laning phase and high mana costs. The biggest strength for Sona has always been that she is particularly good late game, especially if you go the Archangels and heavy AP setups. Out of all the enchanters in the game, Lulu, Nami, all of those champions, she scaled the best, but due to a lack of consistent CC and being gated by mana, she did not see high levels of play. Until we ended up seeing her played in a way that nobody expected. Sona Tahm Kench, or just simply Sona as a sort of double support in the bottom lane, would dominate pro play for a while a couple years back. It was all the rage as you could play her and scale insanely well, and back then support items were even more overtuned than they are now. But once this phase fell off, we didn't see her in the meta until last year, and by her, I actually mean her rework Seraphine. Seraphine would end up replacing Sona because each one of her abilities could do essentially the same thing, just in a better way. She could heal, shield, have a big teamfight ultimate that worked in roughly the same way, but it could also extend, and on top of that fact, Seraphine had wave clear and the ability to play in the mid lane. And since Seraphine also had hard CC in her basic abilities and wasn't completely ultimate reliant, it just meant that there was no reason to ever play Sona. After several Seraphine nerfs though, it felt like for a few months now neither of them were all that good, until recently where a Sona rework popped up. This rework aimed to make Sona excel at what she's already been doing very well for a while, which is late game scaling. By removing her ultimate passive that reduced her ability cooldowns, now she has a stacking system very similar to the old Cassio. These stacks can be gained by damaging enemies and helping allies. These will then reduce your basic ability cooldown by giving you actual ability haste on your basics, and after you reach that cap, you can then infinitely scale as well, because after the basic ability haste is maxed out, every stack then begins to reduce Crescendo's cooldown. So yeah, technically the new Sona has both this Cassiopeia Viktor Rengar-esque stacking system, as well as some infinite scaling, very similar to how Veigar W cooldown is reduced by his stacks. Overall, this rework has been a huge success. Although she is clearly overtuned and due for some nerfs now, it's given her a definitive place within the meta. She is the premier scaling enchanter mage, and that is a good thing, because she and her players were already used to that being the case. Now that it's more tied into her kit and her identity instead of the items that she could build, it means that no matter the meta, this will be her place within the game. She has her own reason for existing, and that's exactly what reworks and updates should try to do. Each champion in League of Legends needs to have a place, and now Sona definitely has one. So today we've covered a lot, and I've said the word stack a total of 67 times to this point, but now what I want to get into is the final part, going over the nitty-gritty details. Let's talk about why there's so many different ways that champions can unlock new abilities and become a more powerful champion. What is the reason that it took Riot until this year to try again with this unique type of scaling now that Viktor and Sona have it? What we're really looking at here is innate champion snowballing. Not snowballing through the purchasing of items or runes getting better, but quite literally evolving your champion's kit. When you get fed right now in Season 11, you gain access to these incredibly powerful mythic items that all have mythic passives as well. Your Conqueror will then benefit from everything else, and you're just this disgusting mix of damage and power creep because runes and items are extremely overtuned. In order for League of Legends to have more champions with really cool stacking systems and things like hunting people down like in Kindred's kit, we would probably have to see the removal of items and runes to consistently see it. A good example is Gangplank's recent mini rework. It kinda disappointed me in some ways because there's so much potential there with his silver serpents. He just gains more barrels by default now. He doesn't have to unlock or purchase that upgrade, it just comes with levels. But it would have been really interesting to see that be tied in with his stacking mechanic. The serpents are cool and they do upgrade and evolve his kit, similar to the old Cassiopeia, but it only upgrades his ultimate and not the rest of his abilities. The problem is, how can you make these little upgrades actually matter and feel impactful without introducing further trauma into the already growing problem of power creep, damage creep, and snowballing games? Every champion that would have some kind of equivalent of a Rengar Bonetooth Necklace with all of those upgrades, on top of throwing in a Mythic and Dark Harvest, would just be impossible to stop. You also would not want to add in these types of evolutions if they were pointless just for the sake of having them. Imagine if these were more common, but the only way it was balanced for it to be something like, let's say Anivia stuns 20 champions, for the rest of the game her wall will be 5% wider. At that point they have no business being in the game. But if the evolution was instead that if Anivia stuns 20 champions with her Q, then her stun has a faster missile speed and a lower mana cost. Oh boy, that's gonna hurt. It's a shame too, because I could think of so many ways where champions could upgrade. Again, drop the whole idea of runes, drop the idea that Riven could have Gore Drinker and Conqueror just for a second, and what if League of Legends only had champion abilities? That way, let's say Riven killed 3 enemies with Wind Slash. For the rest of the game, she gains her full sword back, it gets completely reforged, and it's like she has her ultimate on for the rest of the game. That would be pretty cool, but that could never exist in the current state that League of Legends works. We could sit here and theorize all of the ways that champions could evolve throughout the game, but League just isn't built for this to be a popular way to design champions, precisely because items and runes and summoner spells and dragon buffs and baron buffs, champion power budgets have to take into account the other ways in which they can become stronger. Anyway, what do you guys think about this topic? What do you think about stacking mechanics, and which ones in League are your favorite? Do you actually think we should see more champions like Kindred? Should there be more champions actively using interfaces and making complicated champions that require teamwork? Or do you think that would just add to the frustration that League already gives us? Let me know what you think. Thank you very much for watching, I appreciate it immensely. If you want to support the content, please check out my Patreon. I upload so infrequently because I try to put out a quality product every time. I hope it can, prove to you that I'm really trying out here and trying to make these videos good. But with that being said, please only consider subscribing to the Patreon if you honestly can and want to. It's not required whatsoever. Don't feel pressured. I appreciate you watching the video all the same. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you next time.